20 R&B stars who gave up fame when they had it all. What if I told you that some of the biggest voices in R&B did not fall off? They walked away, while the money, fame, and applause were still pouring in. These were not washed-up artists chasing old glory. They were stars with platinum records, screaming fans, and careers the world thought would last forever. But behind the sold-out shows were silent breakdowns, shattered relationships, spiritual battles, health scares, and a terrifying truth fame was costing them their peace. Tonight, Black Legends Revealed uncovers 20 R&B stars who turned their backs on the spotlight at the very moment most people would have done anything to stay in it. Tyrese Gibson. Tyrese Gibson did not begin as a man the public expected to unravel in plain sight. He came into R&B with charm, confidence, and a voice built for romance, breaking through with Sweet Lady before expanding into film and becoming a familiar face in major franchises. On the surface, he looked like someone who had mastered celebrity from every angle: music, movies, red carpets, and mass appeal. That is what made his breaking point feel so jarring. In 2017, during a bitter custody fight over his daughter, Tyrese posted an emotional video begging not to be separated from her, repeating the line, "What more do you want from me?" The moment spread everywhere and exposed a man who no longer seemed protected by fame at all. What makes Tyrese fit this title is not that he vanished completely. It is that he stopped treating public success as something worth sacrificing himself for. After years of personal strain, public scrutiny, and relationship turmoil, including the end of his marriage to Samantha Lee in 2020, he began speaking more openly about pain therapy, fatherhood, and the emotional cost of living under constant attention. And tell me this: what is celebrity really worth when it cannot protect the parts of your life that matter most? That question gives his story its weight. Tyrese never stopped being an artist. He simply became less interested in pretending that visibility equals peace. Even as he continued to work, he made it clear that there are moments when a man must step back from the performance, not because he is finished, but because he is trying to hold himself together. Lauryn Hill. Lauryn Hill did not drift out of view because the world stopped listening. She stepped back while the world was still asking for more. After rising with the Fugees, she detonated as a solo force in 1998 with The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, an album that debuted at #1, won 5 Grammys for her 1998 work, and became her only solo studio album. It was not just a hit record. It was a cultural event, a work so personal and commanding that it changed the way people heard hip-hop, soul, and womanhood in one breath. Years later, it was certified diamond in the United States, confirming just how massive that moment had been. That is what made her next move so startling. Instead of rushing out a glossy follow-up and feeding the machine that had crowned her, Hill pulled back. Fans expected domination, more awards, more magazine covers, more chart toppers. Instead, they got distance mystery and long stretches of near silence. But tell me this: how many artists are strong enough to walk away when the whole world is still applauding? That question is exactly why her story remains so compelling. She later spoke about the industry as spiritually corrosive and emotionally manipulative, a place that demanded performance not only on stage but inside the soul. What makes Lauryn Hill unforgettable is that her retreat never felt like surrender. It felt like refusal. She would not let fame turn her into a product detached from her convictions. Even now, with occasional performances and her influence still echoing through newer generations, her absence from the usual celebrity cycle only deepens her legend. Lauryn Hill did not lose her momentum. She protected her essence before the spotlight could take it from her. D'Angelo. D'Angelo did not retreat because the audience lost interest. He withdrew because success began to distort the very thing that made him extraordinary. When Brown Sugar arrived in 1995, he sounded unlike anyone else in modern R&B, earthy, intimate, deeply musical, and full of restraint. Critics later credited the album with helping launch the neo-soul wave, and it immediately marked him as more than a singer. He felt like a craftsman, someone rebuilding black music from the inside out. Then came Voodoo in 2000. It debuted at #1, won major acclaim, and turned him from a respected visionary into a full-blown phenomenon. But fame did not crown him in the way he had hoped. The untitled "How Does It Feel" era made him a sensation, yet it also trapped him inside an image he never wanted to live in. Instead of being recognized first for arrangement, groove, and soul, he found himself reduced to a body, a fantasy, a spectacle. In a 2000 interview, he admitted how uneasy it felt when crowds fixated on stripping away his clothes rather than hearing the music. And tell me this, what is stardom worth if people stop seeing the artist and only chase the image? That question sits at the center of his story. So D'Angelo pulled away. For years, he stayed largely out of public reach while wrestling with grief addiction and the psychic weight of being misread. When he finally returned with Black Messiah in 2014, it did not feel like a comeback designed to reclaim celebrity. It felt like a man re-entering on his own terms, heavier, wiser, and far less interested in pleasing the machine. D'Angelo did not abandon music. He refused to let fame rewrite what his gift was for. T-Boz. T-Boz never looked like someone the industry could slow down. As the husky, unmistakable voice of TLC, she helped power one of the most influential groups in modern R&B, turning records like Crazy Sexy Cool and Fan Mail into defining moments in pop culture. On stage, she projected command, cool, and resilience. Offstage, her body was fighting a war most fans could not see. Watkins was diagnosed with sickle cell disease as a child, and in her memoir, she recalled being told she would not live past 30, would never have children, and would face lifelong limitations. Instead, she became a star. But that success came with pain, hospital stays, exhaustion, and the constant strain of performing through a condition that never truly loosened its grip. Then life asked even more of her. TLC endured bankruptcy, internal pressure, and in 2002, the devastating death of Lisa Left Eye Lopes, a loss that changed the group forever. Watkins later faced divorce, motherhood, a brain tumor, and repeated health scares, all while trying to keep moving in an industry that rarely makes room for fragility. And tell me this, how long can anyone keep entertaining the world when simply staying alive already takes that much strength? That question sits at the heart of her story. What makes T-Boz such a powerful fit for this title is that she did not step back because the audience stopped caring. She eased away because survival demanded it. She chose selective appearances, family, and physical well-being over the endless cycle of touring, promotion, and performance. That decision did not diminish her legacy. It clarified it. T-Boz did not just sing about strength. She lived it. And when the spotlight became too costly, she was wise enough to protect the life behind the voice. Maxwell. Maxwell did not leave because he had run out of songs to sing. He stepped away because the machinery around success was moving faster than the kind of music he wanted to make. From the moment Maxwell's Urban Hang Suite began winning devoted listeners in the late 1990s, he stood apart. His records did not chase noise. They invited people closer. With Embrya, and then? Now he built a reputation as one of modern R&B's most elegant voices, measured, romantic, and deeply intentional. By the early 2000s, he had everything an artist could want: critical respect, loyal fans, platinum albums, and a place among the defining figures of neo-soul. That is exactly what made his absence so surprising. After finishing the Now era, he largely vanished from public life for years. What makes Maxwell such a strong fit for this title is that his retreat was never framed like a meltdown. It was quieter than that, almost disciplined. He later said the pressure of making records brought real anxiety, and Reuters reported that after 2002, he pulled the plug on his public life, taking what became a long break before returning. Instead of feeding the cycle of albums, interviews, and appearances just because the market expected it, he chose distance. And tell me this, how often does a man walk away when fame is still treating him well, simply because he refuses to let it hollow out the work? That question is what gives his story its weight. When he returned with Black Summer's Night in 2009, the result proved the pause had not weakened him. The album debuted at #1 and went on to win Grammys, showing that patience had sharpened, not dulled his gift. Maxwell did not abandon music. He chose timing, privacy, and artistic care over constant visibility. And that choice may be exactly why his catalog still feels so refined. India.Ari. India Ari did not turn away because success failed to find her. It found her fast. With Acoustic Soul in 2001, she arrived as a rare kind of star, grounded, luminous, and impossible to confuse with anyone else. Video became a quiet revolution, a song that pushed back against narrow beauty standards and made self-acceptance sound elegant instead of defensive. Her debut earned 7 Grammy nominations, and her follow-up voyage to India confirmed that she was far more than a passing moment. She had the voice, the message, and the public love to remain at the center of mainstream R&B for years. But that path came with a cost she was never willing to pay. The deeper she moved into commercial music, the more she felt the pressure to become something easier to package, more polished, more predictable, less fully herself. Rather than keep bending to expectations that did not fit her spirit, she loosened her grip on the race for constant visibility. And tell me this, what is fame worth if keeping it means slowly becoming unrecognizable to yourself? That question defines her story more than any chart number ever could. What makes India? Ari, so compelling in this list, is that her choice was not dramatic on the surface. It was deliberate. She kept creating, but with more control, more stillness, and more intention. Later projects like Songversation and Worthy, released through her Soulbird imprint, reflected an artist who had chosen alignment over noise. India. Ari did not abandon music. She stepped away from the version of fame that asked her to betray the very truths her songs were built on. Tina Campbell. Tina Campbell did not step back because the music stopped working. She stepped back because her spirit was wearing thin. As one half of Mary Mary, she helped create one of gospel music's most successful crossover acts, bringing faith rhythm and sisterhood into the mainstream with songs that reached far beyond church walls. The duo became a major force in contemporary gospel, and Tina's own official bio still reflects that long run of awards, visibility, and relentless public demand. From the outside, it looked like the kind of success most artists spend a lifetime chasing. What the audience could not see was the personal wreckage building behind the applause. Tina later spoke openly about the pain of discovering her husband Teddy Campbell's repeated infidelity, and outlets covering her book I Need a Day to Pray described a season marked not only by betrayal, but also by grief, postpartum depression, financial strain, and emotional collapse. This was not simple burnout. It was a woman trying to hold together marriage, motherhood, ministry, and public expectation all at once. And tell me this, how long can anyone keep singing through heartbreak before silence starts to feel holier than performance? That is why Tina Campbell belongs on this list. She did not renounce music, but she refused to keep living at the pace fame demanded. She slowed down, turned inward, poured her pain into prayer, wrote a book, and released solo work that sounded more like testimony than entertainment. Tina Campbell did not leave because she had nothing left to give. She stepped aside because her private restoration mattered more than public momentum. Tweet. Tweet did not leave the public eye because she lacked the voice to stay there. She stepped aside because the version of success surrounding her no longer felt livable. When Oops, Oh My arrived in 2002, it turned Charlene Keyes into one of the most distinctive new voices in R&B. The song was sensual, playful, and unlike anything else on radio, and it helped launch Southern Hummingbird, a debut that made her look like a rising fixture of the genre, not a passing chapter. She had the tone, the presence, and the kind of understated magnetism that made listeners lean in rather than chase noise. What makes Tweet such a strong fit for this title is that her withdrawal was not loud or theatrical. It was deeply personal. Years after that breakthrough, she spoke about falling into depression, isolating herself, smoking heavily, drinking, and reaching a point where she was not even sure she wanted to perform again. That is what gives her story its ache. A woman the world associated with softness and intimacy was quietly coming apart while the applause still echoed. And tell me this, how long can someone keep giving beauty to the public when her private world is running on emptiness? That question hangs over everything in her story. When she returned with Charlene in 2016, it did not feel like a chase for relevance. It felt like someone arriving back with less illusion and more peace. Tweet did not stop being an artist. She simply stopped offering herself to an industry that had begun to cost too much. Donell Jones. Donell Jones did not seem like an artist who would ever loosen his grip on the spotlight. At the turn of the 2000s, he had the kind of catalog that made him feel dependable and deeply familiar to R&B listeners where I Want to Be. You Know What's Up and Shorty Got Her Eyes on Me gave him a reputation for smooth, emotionally direct records that sounded built for longevity. He was not a one-hit name. He looked like someone who could keep delivering love songs for years without interruption. That is what makes his quieter seasons so striking. Instead of pressing forward at full speed, Jones later acknowledged that addiction had become part of his story and that it pushed him to step back from making music. What makes Donell fit this title is that his slowdown was not framed as a grand public collapse. It was more personal than that. In a 2020 profile, he said he had dealt with crippling addictions, and the article described his break from recording as part of the cost of those years. Other interviews from his return period also show a man thinking less like a fame chaser and more like a father, businessman, and survivor trying to rebuild his center. And tell me this, what good is staying visible if the life behind the music is quietly coming apart? That is why Donell Jones belongs on this list. He did not stop being talented, and he never lost the voice that made people love him. He simply reached a point where stability mattered more than non-stop exposure. Later projects like Forever and 100% Free felt less like a bid to reclaim celebrity and more like the work of a man who had chosen balance over burnout. Sunshine Anderson. Sunshine Anderson did not look like an artist who would leave the game early. In 2001, Heard It All Before made her one of the freshest voices in R&B, sharp, honest, and instantly relatable. The single climbed to number 18 on the Billboard Hot 100, while her debut album, Your Woman, reached number 5 on the Billboard 200 and went gold. For a moment, she seemed positioned for a long mainstream run. She had the voice, the breakout record, and the kind of everyday emotional clarity listeners trust right away. Billboard chart pages confirm Heard It All Before peaked at number 18 on the Hot 100, and Your Woman peaked at number 5 on the Billboard 200 and was certified gold. What makes Sunshine fit this title is that her story was not built on scandal or collapse. It was built on choice. Later coverage described her as frustrated and discouraged by the music business, and she began studying cosmetology back in North Carolina rather than forcing herself to keep chasing an industry that no longer felt right. More recently, Sunshine herself has said that when her daughter was born, that became a major reason she stepped away from entertainment. And tell me this, how many artists are willing to trade momentum for a life that feels more real? That is what makes her journey so quietly powerful. A 2010 interview described her as dispirited by the music business and studying cosmetology, and a later Instagram post says she stepped away when her daughter was born. Sunshine Anderson did return with later albums, but not with the frantic energy of someone trying to win the race again. She chose a steadier rhythm, one shaped by motherhood, self-direction, and a life beyond applause. That is why she belongs here. She did not wait for fame to reject her. She simply decided there was more to live for than staying visible. Amel Larrieux. Amel Larrieux never felt like an artist built for the loudest corner of celebrity culture. With Groove Theory, she helped create one of the most sophisticated R&B sounds of the mid-1990s. And Tell Me became a top 5 Billboard Hot 100 hit that instantly marked her as a voice worth following. The duo's debut album went gold, and from the outside, the next step seemed obvious: bigger singles, more exposure, a longer run inside the mainstream machine. But LaRue was hearing a different call. Even while the group was still admired, she began moving toward a life that offered more authorship, more room, and far less pressure to fit someone else's template. That is what makes her such a strong fit for this title. She did not get pushed out by scandal or sudden collapse. She made a conscious break. After leaving Groove Theory in 1999, she said the major label environment demanded too many compromises, and later explained that as a solo artist, she had even been asked to tone it down. Rather than shrink her instincts to make the business more comfortable, she moved in the other direction. And tell me this, how many singers are willing to step off a winning path simply because it no longer feels honest? That question gives her story its quiet power. In late 2003, Amal and her husband LaRue founded Bliss Life Records, creating a home for music shaped by her own values instead of market demands. Albums like Brave Bird and Morning did not chase noise. They deepened her world. Amal LaRue did not walk away from music. She walked away from an industry pace that could not hold the fullness of who she wanted to be. Bilal. Bilal did not slip out of mainstream R&B because he ran out of ability or vision. He stepped aside because the system around him no longer had room for the kind of records he wanted to make. When Firstborn Second arrived in 2001, he was immediately marked as one of the most gifted singers of his generation. Restless, elastic, and impossible to pin to one lane. His voice could move from velvet to fire in a single phrase, and his collaborators already included figures tied to the Soulquarians era. From the outside, the next chapter seemed obvious: a bigger album, broader radio play, and a long climb toward major star status. But the story bent in another direction. That turn came with Love for Sale, the album that was supposed to push him further, but instead changed everything. Bilal made a record that was darker, stranger, and more adventurous than his label expected. Interscope resisted it. The project leaked online before its official release, and the album was ultimately shelved. What should have been a breakthrough became a rupture. Yet that rupture also revealed who he really was as an artist, someone unwilling to flatten his imagination just to stay marketable. And tell me this, how many singers would rather lose momentum than dilute the very sound that makes them distinctive? That question is the key to his place on this list. After that, Bilal did not spend his energy chasing the old version of success. He moved deeper into independent work cult respect and creative freedom, building a career that answered to his own instincts rather than executive comfort. Bilal did not quit music. He walked away from the machinery that tried to make him smaller than his gift. Cody Chesnutt. Cody Chesnutt TT never felt like an artist built to live inside somebody else's formula. When the headphone masterpiece arrived in 2002, it sounded unruly, intimate, and startlingly original. A 36-track bedroom-made record that mixed soul, rock, funk, and raw confession in a way the industry did not quite know how to contain. The album earned critical praise, and when The Roots reworked The Seed into The Seed 2.0, his name suddenly moved much closer to the center of the conversation. Major labels came calling, bigger opportunities opened up, and the usual next step should have been obvious. Go harder, go bigger, go fully commercial. But Chesnutt TT was listening to a different instinct. Rather than handing himself over to a machine he did not trust, he chose a quieter road and kept control of how his music reached the world. What makes Cody fit this title so well is that his slowdown was not caused by failure. It came from conviction. In later interviews, he said fatherhood changed everything, and that after the album, he made a conscious decision to live differently, spend time with family, and let life reshape him before music did. And tell me this, how many rising artists would step away just when the industry was finally ready to cash in on them? That question gives his story its power. He did not chase the spotlight simply because it had opened. He measured the cost first. When he returned with a landing on 100 in 2012, it did not sound like a desperate bid to recover momentum. It sounded like a man who had protected his center long enough to create from a steadier place. Cody Chesnutt TT did not stop being an artist. He just refused to let fame become his master. Van Hunt. Van Hunt never seemed interested in becoming the kind of R&B star who smiles on cue and follows a script. From the start, his music carried too much edge for that. His 2004 debut introduced a singer-songwriter with a restless imagination, blending soul-funk rock and sharp, lyrical instinct in a way that made him stand out immediately. A follow-up, On the Jungle Floor, deepened that reputation, and in 2007 he won a Grammy for Family Affair with John Legend and Joss Stone. By then he had enough acclaim, enough industry attention, and enough artistic momentum to keep climbing the usual ladder. That is exactly why what happened next felt so telling. What makes Van Hunt belong on this list is that his distance from fame was not caused by a lack of ability. It came from refusal. His next major label project, Popular, was shelved before release after Blue Note decided not to move forward with it, even though advance copies already existed, and the album was later praised as one of R&B's great lost records. Rather than reshape himself to fit a safer commercial mold, Hunt moved away from that system and began building from a more self-directed place. And tell me this, how many artists would rather lose visibility than let executives flatten what makes them original? That choice is what gives his story its force. Van Hunt did not stop creating. He simply stopped treating mainstream exposure as the goal. He went independent, released work through his own channels, and kept making records that sounded curious, fearless, and answerable to no trend at all. He did not walk away from music. He walked away from the version of fame that asked him to become smaller than his own vision. R.E.S. Rez did not miss her moment because she lacked originality. She missed it because originality was the very thing the mainstream did not know how to handle. When How I Do arrived in 2001, it sounded unlike almost anything else sitting near R&B radio at the time. Billboard praised the album for how effortlessly it blended rock, hip-hop, and R&B, while later coverage of They Say Vision made the problem plain. Her music did not fit comfortably into any pre-approved radio format. That was both her gift and her obstacle. She had the voice, the style, and the artistic nerve to break wide open. But the industry around her wanted categories, and Rez refused to shrink herself to fit one. That is what makes her such a strong match for this title. She did not stumble out of sight because the talent was not there. She pulled away from the mainstream lane because the lane itself was too narrow. Her songs carried mood, attitude, and experimentation. Yet the same qualities that made critics and devoted listeners admire her also made her difficult to package. And tell me this, what happens when an artist is ahead of the market, but the market refuses to move? That tension sits at the center of her story. Rez kept creating, collaborating, and performing, but she no longer moved as someone trying to win a commercial race that had already misunderstood her. That is why she belongs here. She did not walk away from music. She walked away from the pressure to become simpler than she really was, and in doing so, she kept the most important thing intact, her identity. Terence Trent D'Arby / Sananda Maitreya. Terence Trent D'Arby did not merely step back from fame. He eventually rejected the very identity that fame had built around him. When introducing the hardline, according to Terence Trent D'Arby exploded in 1987, he looked like the next great soul phenomenon, stylish, magnetic, and impossible to ignore. Wishing Well became a #1 hit, and the album later earned him the Grammy for Best R&B Vocal Performance, Male. At that point, the script seemed already written: more hits, more hype, more superstardom. But the higher he rose, the less comfortable he became inside the role the industry wanted him to keep performing. What makes his story fit this title so powerfully is that he did not simply go quiet for a while. He treated the old version of himself as something he needed to outgrow completely. On his official site, Sananda Maitreya traces that transformation back to the mid-1990s. Later interviews and biographies note that by 2001, he had formally said goodbye to the Terence Trent D'Arby name and moved forward under a new one. That was not a branding tweak. It was a radical act of self-definition. And tell me this, how many stars would walk away not just from attention, but from the very name that made them famous. That is why he belongs on this list. He did not stop creating. He relocated, built a different life in Europe, and kept recording outside the old expectations. Terence Trent D'Arby walked away from fame. Sananda Maitreya kept the art and left the mask behind. Chrisette Michele. Chrisette Michele did not drift away because the audience suddenly stopped hearing her talent. She was a Grammy-winning singer with a voice that could move easily between jazz, gospel, soul, and R&B. And by the late 2000s, she had built the kind of career many artists spend decades chasing. Songs like Be Okay and If I Have My Way had already made her a respected name, and she looked positioned for a long, steady run, built on musical credibility rather than hype. That is exactly why what happened next felt so abrupt. In January 2017, Michele accepted an invitation to perform during Donald Trump's inauguration events, explaining at the time that she hoped to be a bridge in a divided country. Instead, the decision triggered a backlash so fierce that it changed the course of her public life almost overnight. What makes her story fit this title so closely is that the fallout did not simply bruise her image. It pushed her away from the very public arena where she had once seemed secure. Reports and later interviews described severe professional consequences, including lost support, canceled opportunities, and intense public condemnation. Michele later spoke about depression, suicidal thoughts, and a miscarriage she connected to the stress of that period, while other reporting noted that she also faced a bipolar diagnosis and serious emotional collapse in the years that followed. And tell me this, how many artists can withstand that kind of public rejection and still find a reason to keep singing at all? That is why Chrisette Michele belongs on this list. She did not walk away because she lacked a gift. She stepped out of the spotlight because the cost of remaining there had become devastatingly high. In time, she resurfaced as an independent artist, speaking more openly about healing, faith, and survival. Chrisette Michele did not choose obscurity. She chose to rebuild herself somewhere beyond the noise that nearly destroyed her. Claudette Ortiz. Claudette Ortiz looked like the kind of artist who should have had a much longer run in the center of R&B. As the female voice of City High, she helped give the group its emotional balance on songs like What Would You Do and Caramel Records that turned the trio into one of the most memorable early 2000s acts. What Would You Do reached the top 10 of the Billboard Hot 100 and earned a Grammy nomination, while the group's only album made enough noise to suggest something bigger was coming. From the outside, Ortiz seemed perfectly positioned for the next phase solo records. More features, more visibility, more momentum. But what makes Claudette fit this title is that her life offstage became heavier than the rewards on it. City High broke apart quickly, and the personal entanglements inside the group made the fallout even more draining. Ortiz later married fellow member Ryan Toby, divorced in 2007, and became a mother while trying to figure out where music fit into a life that no longer moved in a straight line. In later interviews, she said that after having her daughter Bella Interscope released her, and she shifted her focus toward her children and rebuilding on her own terms. And tell me this, how many artists can keep chasing visibility when home is already asking everything from them? That is why her story lingers. Claudette Ortiz did not crash out in public or burn through every last chance. She quietly chose a different center of gravity. She still returned here and there through solo music features, acting, and R&B divas Los Angeles, but not with the desperation of someone trying to reclaim old heat. She moved like a woman who had learned that being seen is not the same as being settled. Claudette Ortiz did not stop being talented. She simply stopped treating fame as the prize worth chasing at any cost. Rahsaan Patterson. Rahsaan Patterson belongs on this list for a different reason than most. He did not storm out of fame after a public collapse, and he was not swallowed by some dramatic scandal. He simply learned very early that celebrity was not the prize. As a child, he became known to audiences as the Kid on Kids Incorporated from 1984 to 1987, stepping into national attention long before most performers even know who they are. but in a 2024 interview with People Patterson, said that after experiencing that early recognition, he understood something crucial. Fame itself was never what mattered to him. From that point on, he said everything became about the work. That choice shaped the rest of his career. In the 1990s, Patterson wrote for artists like Brandy and Tevin Campbell, then launched his own solo run with his 1997 self-titled debut. He followed it with albums like Love in Stereo After Hours, Wines and Spirits Bluephoria, and Heroes and Gods, building a respected catalog without ever bending himself into a mainstream personality act. He kept recording, kept touring, and kept earning devotion from listeners who valued craft over noise. And tell me this, how many singers get a real taste of fame and then decide they would rather protect their artistry than chase a bigger spotlight? That is what makes his story so compelling. Patterson's life also demanded inner work beyond music. In that same People interview, he spoke about confronting childhood abuse, doing the emotional labor to heal, and later coming out to loved ones as gay. None of that pushed him toward louder publicity. If anything, it deepened his commitment to living truthfully rather than performatively. So Rahsaan Patterson did not walk away from fame in the usual dramatic sense. He did something subtler, and in some ways rarer. He refused to let fame become the center of his identity in the first place. He kept the music, kept the audience, and left the emptier parts of celebrity behind. Lalah Hathaway. Lalah Hathaway fits this list in a quieter, more elegant way than most. She did not storm out of the industry, nor did she collapse under public chaos. She simply refused to build her life around the kind of fame that swallows everything else. Born into musical royalty as the daughter of Donny Hathaway, she had every reason to chase the brightest possible spotlight. And early on, she easily could have. Her 1990 debut, Lalah Hathaway reached the top 20 on Billboard's top R&B/hip hop albums chart, while Heaven Knows rose to number 3 on the hot R&B/hip hop songs chart. Later, she kept earning respect rather than noise, collecting multiple Grammy wins, including Best R&B Performance and several Best Traditional R&B Performance trophies. What makes her belong here is that she never seemed interested in becoming a celebrity first and an artist second. While others chased magazine covers, controversy, or crossover overexposure, Hathaway built a career around musicianship, collaboration, and control. She gravitated toward intimate stages, live instrumentation, and records that served the song rather than the market. Even her biggest later triumphs, such as Lalah Hathaway Live and her 2024 album Vantablack, felt less like bids for domination than extensions of a life already rooted in craft. She also eventually released music through her own Hathaway Entertainment, which made that independence even clearer. And tell me this, how many singers turn down the louder path not because they cannot take it, but because they already know it is not where their greatness lives? That is why Lalah Hathaway is such a graceful way to close this list. She did not really walk away from music. She walked away from the idea that visibility is the same thing as value. In doing so, she built something rarer than hype, a career measured in depth, longevity, and respect. She chose substance over spectacle, and that may be the most powerful departure from fame of all. So what do you think? Did these artists truly walk away from fame, or did they simply refuse to let fame define them? Some chose family, some chose healing, some protected their faith, their peace, or their creative freedom. But every one of them made a decision that challenged the way the world measures success. In an industry that rewards constant visibility, stepping back can be the boldest move of all. Now we want to hear from you. Which artist's journey moved you the most? And who do you believe gave up the biggest spotlight? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to Black Legends Revealed.